Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Data-Driven Decisions, Shaping the Future of Employee Mental Health. I'm David Saab, Business Alliance Manager and Mental Wellbeing Champion here at the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce. Today, we'll explore how data and analytics can play a vital role in supporting mental health in the workplace. I'm delighted to have panelists today joining me. If you'd like to turn on your screen, and in a moment I shall hand you over to Lisa Lloyd, who will introduce the topic, and we look forward to hearing from her. So without further ado, over to you, Lisa.
Thank you very much, David. I'm really pleased to be chairing this webinar because responding to the needs of people in an informed way really underpins my practice. So I'm very aware of how important data is in terms of creating healthy workplaces for people to thrive. So I'm very much looking forward to today's session. One of the things I think, or one of the reasons I think we need to talk about this a little bit more is because we are seeing, or I'm seeing, so much money being invested into the area of mental health and wellbeing in companies. But there's a huge question mark over the impact. Lots of people are trying to do the right thing. They now get to the agenda. They know that they need to look after employees, look after their people, so that people, they can perform well. They are able to function well in terms of their health and their relationships and productivity. But knowing that people need to get the mental health and wellbeing thing right and knowing what to do are quite different. So I'm seeing lots of companies who have a really good intention to do the right thing, but they're not quite hitting the mark. And that's often because people don't really understand what the needs are. We're guessing, we're making assumptions. And that's where people analytics comes in, and using data to really understand what people need so that we can really target our resources and have the biggest impact, which is why today being joined by Charlie Winton, from who's founder of OK Positive, is brilliant. He's going to be talking us through some case studies that highlight how to use data and the impact that can have when we do it well. So welcome, Charlie.
Thank you, Lisa. It's brilliant to be here. I'm excited to share some of this information and get questions, really kind of discuss and explore further how we do these things in practical terms, which I think is the most important thing, because a lot of people get information overload, but it's actually, how do I take actionable insight from this? So I'm excited for today.
Fab. So how we're shaping today is we're going to kick off with some poll questions in a moment. Then we are going to have 3 case studies that Charlie is going to share with us. And what we're going to do is, after each case study, we are going to then have a bit of a discussion around it. And then you can ask your questions and we'll answer those questions as we go along. So please use the Q&A function on Zoom at the bottom of your screen. Put your questions in there. And then after each case study, we'll take some time just to work through some of those as we go, just to remind you that your answers are completely anonymous. So Kirsty, can we have some of the poll questions up, please? This is a really good one to start with. How are you feeling at work currently? How are you really feeling? Not that kind of polite, yeah, I'm fine, thanks. But how are you really feeling? So tick all those that apply. And again, don't forget, it's completely anonymous. I'm intrigued to see what the response is going to be. Okay, can we see the results, Kirsty, please? Wow, okay, pretty even between stress, overwhelmed or anxious, and the happy or at least content. What do you make of that, Charlie?
I think it kind of highlights, well, for people who are putting stress, overwhelmed, anxious, they're not alone, firstly.
Yeah.
I am also in that that group. I think it's where you're seeing a kind of a mixture of all of these emotions. It kind of sums up human nature, and things aren't simply one thing or another. It's not binary. So there can be a range of different things, and that can change over time. So I think it's really interesting, but you know, seeing stressed and happy being the two highest of the two.
Yeah,
but the engaged to perform well, able to engage and perform well, is quite low compared to that. It's really interesting.
yeah. And I think it demonstrates the impact, or the challenge, I should say, for leaders in terms of knowing that you've got a proportion of your workforce who are potentially feeling great and really able to engage and are quite productive, and some who are feeling stressed or overwhelmed. And I wonder if they know who those individuals are. Thanks for that. Right, can we have the next question, please? And that, I like this question because I think often we can sign up to things because we think that sounds interesting, but we haven't really thought about what we want to get from it. So when we are clear about what our intention is in terms of showing up today, or listening back on a recording, it helps, I think about the what after might happen. And can we have the results, Kirsty, please? Is that what you're expecting, Charlie?
Yeah, I think quite often we're trying to learn. So obviously everyone's trying to upskill and learn and add new strings to their bow. But at the same time, seeing what other people are doing, what's working, I think peer-to-peer knowledge share is really invaluable. That's why we build networks. And I think that's why this Chamber of Commerce Mental Health Steering Group exists. Like, it's great to learn from other people and what works. So yeah, I'm not surprised by that at all.
I also think it highlights, you know, as humans, we are naturally quite inquisitive and quite curious about what new things are out there. And I think what I like about today and what you're going to be bringing, Charlie, is the fact that it's about evidence-based practice, because there are lots and lots of kind of shiny new initiatives that people like to grab hold of. It's like, oh, that looks great. It's been marketed very well, or someone I know is doing it. Haven't necessarily evaluated it, but I like that person, so we'll do the same thing. And I think actually understanding what's out there, but understanding what works and what perhaps doesn't work so well is really, really key. So thank you for that. And then finally, third question. And then when you're ready, Kirsty, please. Okay, so again, it's not, I can say it's quite a similar split. It's not, there's moderately very safe bet. What do you think about that, Charlie?
Very intrigued by the prefer not to say, because that kind of gives me an indication of what the situation is. And I think that's something that exists in workplaces. And it's that, you know, while we've provided an anonymity here and we have absolutely no idea who's typed that, they still prefer not to say.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of support, it's interesting because we have individuals here on their organizations. Some of them could be involved in the initiatives. The problem is, in organizations, we can have 20, 2,000, 10,000, 30,000 people. And so it's quite difficult to see. Even here in 57 people, we've got a big split around how people perceive, you know, whether they're not in the same organization or not. But it's interesting because everyone has a different perspective on what is great support and why.
Yeah, and I think you know, even what is great support, how well supported you feel, that's open to so much interpretation, isn't it, in terms of what someone thinks is good and not so good. I also think, going back to your point, Charlie, about the 3%, that person who said they prefer not to say, it really highlights the problem with trying to collect data when people have a real fear around what's that going to disclose, you know, what's it going to reveal? Is it going to, could I be found out? Or is it going to point a finger at me? I will then have a responsibility to do something with it. There are so many fear factors around collecting data. but we might cover some of that today, I guess.
Yes.
Thank you for doing the polls. I want to introduce you now, before we go on to hearing about the case studies, to Carl Simons, who's going to be talking to us a little bit. He's just going to reflect on some of what we've just heard about in the polls and just relate that to what's actually going on a more sort of national stage. So thanks for joining us, Carl.
Hello, Lisa. Hello, Charlie. Hello, everyone. It's great to be involved.
So tell us, what you might have just seen the results of those poll questions, which kind of give a flavour of what's going on with this particular group of people who are joining us today. Can you set the scene a little bit more about sort of a more national context in terms of this, mental health well-being in the workplace?
So for those of you I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, Carl Simons, I'm a mechanical electrical engineer by trade, but I've been involved in the occupational safety and health arena for the past 35 years now. At 51, I'm still going. And the reality is, having worked for the last been an advisor, I guess, to the Cabinet Office and government for the last 4 successive prime ministers, having an understanding of what the national level is doing around government and historically, and where the focus areas have been, alongside how that's radiated into business. But let's start with one of the biggest thing I always like to start with is the cultural side. And if I look at one of the results there that struck me, that came out quite clearly, it was the last question: how well do you feel supported by your employer? And I want to start with that because it really does have a view of how the nation is feeling. You guys are in business who just answered that question. But what is really interesting, although you said moderately or very well, was at 77% that I noted down. And that actually reflects in me that recently in 2022, a survey by Construction News found that over half of workers in the construction arena, I know it's not all about construction, but this is a good example, 60% came back. The workers feel that they didn't feel supported. But then 2 years on, the recent report by Vitality that's recently been released in 2024 found that 71%, they surveyed 4,000 people, and 71% of construction workers felt that an employer does play an active role in helping them maintain their health and well-being. And when I think about what's going on there, we've had quite a big shift over even a couple of years, but I think it goes back even further than that. And if you think 15 years ago, when we started really pushing the mental health in business agenda, I remember at the time, a lot of executives and business leaders that I was speaking to were really, didn't really understand and make the connection between the extrinsic link around the importance of occupational health, the mental health and physical health of individuals, and their ability then to be able to feel psychologically safe in work, because culture plays a big part in this. But as we got royals and sports personalities and celebrities starting to speak more openly about their mental health, so did that get picked up within society. And lots of people started speaking more about their mental health within society, societies in work. So therefore, those water cooler moments where people were starting to have conversations around how they felt in the workplace. And we know some of the biggest contributing causes to general sickness absence is as a result of stress, anxiety, budget pressures, time, demands on the workload, etc., that can manifest in negative stressors within the workplace. I think what's really encouraging is I'm seeing, certainly reading about and seeing a lot of increased awareness has been a big factor in how organizations, because if society is in business, business leaders have had to take this responsibly and had to start taking the mental health of their employees responsibly. So we saw the evolution of mental health first aiders, which many people have within their workplaces, which were a catalyst to be able to harvest those issues and challenges that were being raised, and then provide pathways not only to those individuals who needed help and support, but also feedback into the management and into employers about what is going on within employees within their workplace. So I've seen some great leadership in some many major organizations, and let's face it, major organizations do always start the charge in taking things responsibly, and that then starts to manifest out into the medium and smaller organizations where the how people are feeling and how people are behaving starts to really have an impact. So it's for me, it's an increasingly positive story that I'm seeing across the board. And you may think with any of us at any point in time, we may feel pressured at work, and we may have, you know, a boss that doesn't really appreciate us or say thank you, well done often enough. It may be those you know, areas where our peers don't respect us in the way we'd like them to and treat us in that way. There will always be negative moments throughout our general ups and downs each year of working in business. But ultimately, when you step back and you look at what was happening 10 years ago and then 20 years ago, I see a real shift in how businesses in particular are responding. Now then, when I start to look then at areas such as government, and obviously I do a lot of work with organizations and with governments, and I start to look at the regulator and how the regulator is behaving around this. And recently I spoke with a number of members from the Health and Safety Executive who I work closely with, and I started to articulate with them some of the challenges that I presently see that will need to be addressed. And I'm not afraid to share this with you either. So if you think about the current stress guidance under the Health and Safety at Work Act that's been released by the Health and Safety Executive, there's some real challenges that the Health and Safety Executive would only consider investigating potential issues of absence related to work-related stress, where it's evident that several employees are experiencing this, and that they will not investigate individual cases due to operational priorities, is how they put it within the stress guidance. And that's a real challenge for me, right? So when I start to look at how we not so much enforce, but we have to have a balance around solid regulatory pressure coming from our regulator, that also drives employers to do the right thing. If you cast your mind back to 1995, when we introduced the RIDDO regulations around reporting of injuries, disease and dangerous occurrence, it really changed UK PLC overnight in terms of employers took things seriously and knew they had to start implementing proactive safety controls to be able to offset the injuries and incidents that are occurring. And we've seen a really big drive around that and an outcome which is brilliant. I still feel that government and the regulator has a lot more of a part to play in terms of how they set the tone across business, that anybody off work as a result of work-induced illness is unacceptable, and organizations need to be held to account. So 2 parts. A big positive in terms of what I've seen in business across the board generally as a result of societal uptake in better mental health demands for employees and their people. Government needs to do a lot more incentivizing and regulating how employers that aren't taking it seriously need to really act appropriately. Lisa, I hope that gives a kind of overview from my thinking.
It completely does. And that's exactly why we got you on here, because your passion comes across loud and clear. So thank you so much for that, Carl. Don't go anywhere, because Charlie's now going to explain his first case study, talk us through that. The time is really tight today, so he's only going to have about 3 minutes before you might hear the countdown timer going, because we want to then follow up with a discussion and have some questions before we go on to the next one. So over to you, Charlie.
Amazing. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you, Carl, for that input. I think it's really interesting. And I think from these case studies, what you'll understand is that there are both individual and collective situations within workplaces. And while you can't monitor every individual situation, you can see what the predominant, like the amount of people in your business are feeling and what they're going through. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of that. So the first one was looking at a proactive approach around employee mental health, so looking at prevention rather than cure. The organization was a forensic science enterprise, around 193 employees to begin with, but that scaled up. We worked on one site and we engaged them in a project of looking at what's going on under the hood, so to speak. And essentially they came to us because they'd had individuals within their organization turning to their MPs about mental health and culture in the organization as they didn't know where else to go. They actually, funnily enough, had an employee assistance program and a rewards benefits package. Now, these weren't things that really were utilized and they didn't learn anything from them. So the themes around this process that we wanted to get into were actually getting them engaged, getting rid of the apathy that they had for surveys in the organization, and learn through their feedback and look at the culture of the business to make proactive changes and actually measure whether they worked or not. Because ultimately, you can have one person complaining about your business culture and the other 99 people out of 100 are feeling wonderfully brilliant about it. So maybe you just need to look at that isolated incident. So we looked at a very simple framework of implementation, insights, intervention, and then evaluating the impact of what was going on to make it simple and understandable for the HR team and the CEO. So we were kind of built in with the CEO, senior management teams, and then working directly with HR. We started off with that implementation process. So we got everyone into workshops, lived experience, talked about mental health within organizations, how you do need to use your voice to speak up, and most importantly, how we would be intervening alongside the company based on that feedback. Transparency and accountability were really crucial for these employees because they were disengaged, they were apathetic to any forms of surveys, and they kind of given up on shouting into the wind. Within 5 weeks, we had 1,500 data points across 193 individuals and identified 3 different issues that were predominant across the organization, and most of them related, funnily enough, to the IT system. So we're talking about a business operation. We're not talking about the wider kind of mental health employee assistance programs, mental health first aiders. We're talking about day to day, it was causing them an hour delay each day. Now, across all those employees, that's a lot of overwhelm and stress. So we spoke with the company, we decided on an intervention and communicated that process to every single member of staff. And they overhauled the IT system to replace it because they realized it was no longer fit for purpose, which didn't cost them actually as much as you would think. And so what they did is they evaluated that, and within that process, we then looked at the impact of it. So the key around that was just across engagement, and I saw that people were asking about engagement and employees. 10% increase in staff engagement across that site and 14% increase in employee mood. So that was self-evaluated feedback from the same staff that wouldn't want to do a survey in the first place before we'd gone in on this project. But not only that, we looked at the impact of that. So that was increased productivity, all the kind of taglines that we see across businesses that we want to achieve. We want to have more retention, more productivity, more satisfaction, and that commitment. So essentially, we saw that employees self-reported 5 hours per week of lost productivity due to that system, and now they'd got rid of that and it was improved situation. So they looked at that insight, they made an intervention, they evaluated the impact, which did cause that 14% boost in productivity. And essentially, if we're looking at 193 employees saving an hour a day, and this issue had been going on for 6 months prior to us doing this project, you can see the considerable amount of money that they will have been wasting on that lack of productivity. Not just that, the employee satisfaction engagement. So feeling heard, valued, respected, something they hadn't had from a yearly survey or a biannual survey, meant that actually the key part was not necessarily the survey and the response, it was the fact that the senior leadership had intervened to make a change for them. And they followed up with a survey, funnily enough, the thing that they weren't getting a lot of feedback from previously, and it was the highest response rate that they'd had. The end result of this case study and this project was they rolled it out for every site and committed to another 2 years of working on projects because they'd seen the benefit of doing that in a smaller group of people. So I will stop talking now because I'm conscious of time.
I think that's such a great example of getting clarity about what's really going on, and that's reducing people to be able to be productive, and the value of check-ins, proper check-ins, and being able to give people a voice where they can talk about an IT system which is causing that distraction, that kind of taking their attention elsewhere and their focus elsewhere. And that's quite a relatively straightforward fix. But until you hear someone's voice, you don't know that that's an issue. And I remember running a webinar years ago about stress with an organisation, and we just got talking about what causes stress. And suddenly this one person spoke up and said, it's MS Teams constantly pinging away at me. And then suddenly the floodgates opened and everyone jumped on board. And it was such an easy thing for them to fix. We're like, oh, we can do something about that. It's quite straightforward. But unless we get the information, we can't match the solution to the right need. We're guessing and sometimes missing the spot. I thought that was brilliant, Charlie.
Yeah, and I think you can't be everything to everyone, and every employee has a responsibility to understand their mental health, become more self-aware, look at what's caused the root cause of what they're feeling. But as an organization, it's predominantly operationally that things will go wrong, and the things that you can control as an organization. Yes, you can give them all these shiny perks and benefits, but ultimately, if you've got managers that are not trained enough, that are causing stress and that's filtering down, that's the issue you've got to resolve, not necessarily providing them a cycle to work scheme or therapy on hand. Rather look at, okay, let's train our managers, because it's that root cause and look at the impact of making that change. Quite often it's not the biggest things in the world that cause the biggest problems, but stress over a long period of time becomes overwhelm, and that's where you see real problems and people leaving businesses.
I couldn't agree more. It's for me, I like to strip back the noise and kind of go back and simplify things rather than taking on more and more initiatives, which is why I was interested about the poll question at the start, like what people are here for, because I think it's very easy to think we've got a problem, we need to fix it, we're going to grab another new thing to take on to try and resolve it. And actually, it's not necessarily about taking on more stuff, it's about understanding what's going on in your organization now and dealing with that, which is not necessarily about, as you say, the kind of extra perks and so on. Carl, have you got anything to add to that?
Always love it when we are able to connect the impact we have around listening to individuals with the productivity outcomes then changing. And I think it's fairly self-evident that, in organizations, we often make changes at the very foundation level around our resources, our structure, our standards, and our systems that we use. And we underestimate how important it is to then communicate up through the different levels that affect belief and passion within individuals. Because, as you make a change at the foundation, let's say the system in this case, you then inspire belief and passion, which in turn affects culture. Oh, they listen to us because it's internal. That in turn affects behavior because it's external. You can see things changing. Oh, people are acting differently. That manifests then in a prevention of harm for individuals. It is so fundamentally intrinsically linked that when we make fundamental changes at the foundation level, we will naturally, if we get it right, have an impact as we go up through the different levels that affect individuals, both internally and externally. It's underestimated often the how belief and passion radiates in terms of people will not behave a certain way, they will not act a certain way, they will not think a certain way if they don't believe in what the organization is doing. And often that's because of a lack of communication, either from the leadership level or understanding from the individuals of why decisions are taken. So communication plays a big factor in that. Great case study, Charlie.
And we've got a question, Charlie, for you. There's someone talking about they understand and agree that there's an apathy for surveys. So the question is, without any survey, if you're trying to avoid doing surveys because of the apathy around that, how do you learn or how do you find out what the issues are so that you can understand how to improve their well-being? What engagement routes did you use as it gets more difficult, particularly with hybrid working?
There's different methods. So if you look at today's example, we've surveyed every single person on this call on 3 main questions that we asked. And it took us, under 3 minutes to do that process. So there are ways you can do it through technology. There are ways that you can have this built into team meetings. If you imagine this was a team meeting, if you're hybrid, we used a mental health application, which was anonymous and fed back the feedback on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And the key on that was actually giving and incentivizing those individuals to utilize that tool. So what are they going to get out of it? In the same way, why do you use a Fitbit? Because you get all your data inputs. It tells you about your health. that's really interesting for people, or bring them information that they need. Because the apathy for surveys isn't just in workplaces. Like, who here uses Amazon? You get asked, how was your purchase after you've purchased every single time? And you're not getting anything out of that. You're giving them information. You feel like, why should I give Amazon my information without getting anything back? So there are different ways that you can engage your people, whether that's in person, whether it's like learning about sentiment. If it's hybrid, try and find a piece of technology or ways to do it while you're in person on calls or you're in team meetings, and then compile all of that and communicate out. So we use technology, but there are different methods to do it.
I'm also a fan of, when you're having those conversations with your team and one-to-one, and people who are working remotely, I'm a fan of getting on the phone and actually just getting outside, having a walking, talking meeting to have a proper check-in, and just asking people what's causing you most stress today, what's getting in the way of you being able to be really productive or perform well today. And because it's sometimes you can just through the conversation and someone naturally just being curious, you can find out so much. It doesn't have to be necessarily a formal approach. Okay,
let me come in on that
Carl.
as well, Lisa, if that's all right.
Yeah.
I do think surveys are great, but done in moderation, I think at the right times. Often it's nice if the questions you ask are wrapped into the wider organizational survey that most organizations undertake on an annual basis. I think the importance of that is often we listen to the vocal majority, and we ignore the silent majority. So if you think about the context of that, it's almost like sometimes leaders will hear very vocal people, and that means we're like magpies chase after the shiny next best thing, because we think everybody's talking about that and that's what everybody wants. Whereas in truth, the silent majority often may not have a voice and don't raise stuff enough. Because they're getting on with the general day-to-day. So we've got to find ways to be able to tap into those on a regular basis. I love the fact that Charlie raised technology. I work in a technology firm, so artificial intelligence is becoming quite prevalent now, but it's got to be carefully used as well, because ultimately, if you're just asking a chatbot, what should we do? It's out into the generative AI algorithms will be reaching out into the internet and getting from wherever. So actually turning stuff internally and turning it real is really, really important. But never ignore the silent majority within your company is my best advice.
Fab advice. Right. Can we go on to our second case study, Charlie? And Charlie, you've got to speak up because it's sometimes a bit hard. Just holler.
I have removed my headphones, so I hope that's worked.
Thank you.
Responded back there. So yes, the second case study was with a much smaller organization. So we often get different excuses around, oh, well, we've got too many people in our organization. We've got too little people to make a difference. If you have less people, I think it's actually more personal, and you find different methods to engage and support them. So this charity had around 25 employees. We were engaged by the head of people originally, and then the CEO to talk about, they were worried about the internal culture of the business. They didn't really know what was going on. I think it was quite a close-knit group of people, but they weren't getting an awful lot of engagement from that situation. So we worked with them, and I believe we started working with them probably a bit too late, as you'll see from this case study. But essentially, we did that same process of implementation, insights, intervention, and evaluation. And we started again with talking and educating. Many reasons people put that they were here today. The staff wanted to learn about mental health. They also wanted to learn about how they could feed back anonymously to their team without, there being 25 of them around. And they started that real-time daily check-in process. And within the first 8 weeks, they found around 120 data points, and it was all relating to the management communication. And in particular, it was the finance team. And they were comfortable saying that. So we saw feedback that was quite concerning. They were highlighting the fact that they wanted to leave the business through anonymous feedback. And so we saw this as a great concern. And, 4 of their finance team were struggling with the targets and the management support around those targets. And it was that communication side. So we then worked around an intervention of having improved manager training for those managers, well, in particular, the finance team manager. And they changed the communication to weekly one-to-ones from the head of people and the manager at the same time. And then they evaluated the feedback from that process of a 13% increase in staff engagement, a 16% increase in employee mood. So you're looking at those self-evaluated feedback channels again, going, right, okay, the main issue was manager training, manager communication, which was actually causing people wanting to leave the business, which for a charity of 25 employees, if you lose 4 of your finance team, is going to probably cripple it. Because you're not going to get that fundraising in. So from a cultural perspective, everyone started logging their moods together because it was a small team. They did it in team meetings like this. They talked about, right, it's anonymous. They felt a safe culture of feedback. And it led to more conversations actually starting within those team meetings, within that manager training, because quite traditionally a business would say, well, you're not treating your people very well to the manager, or they would go to the staff and say, you just need to tough up. You're not working hard enough. The manager's right. So this was a healthy balance of going, actually, let's communicate, let's get training for the manager, and let's work on the weekly one-to-ones to protect the staff. From this process, those 4 members of staff stayed for the whole 18-month project that we did with them, which was saving them approximately £32,000 in rehiring and training costs alone. And that was quite reserved judgment based on the salaries. And they reported increased productivity and engagement further on from those underperforming divisions because the finance team were not performing well at that time for the charity. So you're looking at this more from a cultural perspective rather than an IT system. This was more around communication and transparency. And if you can make those changes, no matter how small, it can actually make a much larger impact, particularly on smaller organizations.
I think it's really interesting hearing this case study, Charlie, because it goes back to the point you made earlier about manager training and manager support and development. There was some data I was reading recently about suggesting that for almost 70% of people, their manager has the greatest impact on their mental health and well-being, which is on a level with their partner. And I don't think many organizations realize or have really thought that through in terms of that impact of those managers on their teams, and actually how those managers need to be supported, because very, very few of them, a lot of them come under fire, but a lot of them are left unsupported and underdeveloped. Really interesting to see that. Carl, what was your observation?
Yeah, I know culture was mentioned quite a few times there, but I'm with you, Lisa. In terms of the line management education, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to be able to make sure that managers are given the appropriate training and education around mental health, certainly in the workplace, because it's an area where we should have active training, in my view. In my previous role as 10 years as the Chief Safety and Security Officer and Occupational Health Lead within Thames Water, we provided the likes of your 2-day mental health first aiders for 1 in 10 individuals, but it wasn't them that was really the top of mind for my focus. They were the people who actively engaged and involved because they wanted to be part of it. It's ultimately the line management and making sure that they had a half-day awareness course, followed by then drip-fed waves of initiatives around it, but they were always clearly communicated to in terms of how to go about dealing with individuals with a variety of different challenges, whether it's illness or whether it's disease or whether it's your lifestyle factors that came into the workplace, such as bereavement, divorce, moving home, whatever it may be. Ultimately, how do you empower those individuals to be able to help and support the people who work for and on their behalf? And you can't ignore this. And I think business has got a lot better around this, but obviously there's always still more work to do. But, there's no silver bullet in this. It's a combination of good policies, good procedures in place, and good support and training, followed by the ability to empower those individuals to make decisions that are right for their teams.
And I also think it's that training and support, like you said, Carl, has to be around some time on mental health and wellbeing. But I'm also an advocate for giving that training and support and development around psychological safety, how to have good check-ins, how to lead good conversations, how to show you care, all the stuff that kind of creates the right environment that culture for people to be able to thrive, for them to be able to experience good health and perform well, which in turn generates that more positive sense of mental health and well-being. So it's such a broad array of knowledge and skills and a lot of confidence that needs to come for managers. And the number of times I get approached, almost kind of like pulled off to the side in hushed tones, someone confessing that they don't feel that they know how to manage their team very well. They've been doing it for a long time. They can't now say, actually, I don't really know how to do this, because the expectation is that they should have mastered this by now. But without any training, it's a bit potluck.
I agree.
We haven't got any more questions for that. So should we, unless you've got anything else you want to bring out of that case study, Charlie, in terms of kind of raising, should we go to our final case study, and then we can have a bit more of conversations and Q&A after that?
So has that come up? Was that live on the screen?
That's good.
Perfect. So this is, and there is a little kind of twist and turn at the end that I'll talk about in this case study. So we started working with a marketing agency, around 30 employees this time, directly with the head of people, who was working on behalf of the CEO to put in an intervention because he'd noticed stress within the team. The same process again, so I won't bore you to tears with that, but look at the implementation. Once again, we looked at the workshops for staff and an employee satisfaction survey straight off the bat. Let's look at the trends of what's going on, because they didn't have it from those open conversations. The insights that we had 100% engagement rate on that survey within the first 48 hours, and we saw a staggering amount of issues surrounding workload. And also alongside that, they were struggling with kind of the team environment in the office, the kind of resources that they had, the setup of the office, the teams being in different places across that kind of open working space, meaning it wasn't conducive to their working environment or the teams that they were in. So the intervention was a workload reallocation, sitting in those teams, firstly removing them in that office to sitting in more conducive working environments. And then they did the office space restructure alongside that, and then delegated more work amongst each other, because they opened up to each other saying, look, half of us are doing a lot of work, half of us are struggling. And the other half are not, they're actually getting on with their things and could do more to muck in those team units. So by doing that process, they evaluated a 34% increase in staff engagement and a 19% increase in employee mood, which once again was probably the highest increase that we've seen. The working environment, based on that, they kept doing those surveys and kept reiterating each 3 months. And what was really interesting is they provided that mental health support for individuals alongside it. So 72% of the users that we were working with in that organization were logging their moods over the weekend, but also inputting things for themselves to learn about mental health and awareness and self-awareness. Now, the caveat, and I did say there would be a twist at the turn, the head of people left this business, and the CEO terminated the projects because he didn't like the feedback around the workload and thought that the culture should be high performance, high scale up organization. Since then, 7 people have left the business, and this process is not continuing. So the interesting thing from that is to look at the success of one side of things and the failure of doing it in terms of following up. And if you engage one person with an organization and they leave, or if you engage 3 people, you need everyone on side to look at this process of self-learning and going, it's not my way or the highway. And that's one of the things that we see in smaller organizations that causes quite a lot of detriment to both the employees and also the success of the business.
Really interesting, that whole workload focus, because workload comes up a lot, and you'll see that in terms of being a challenge for people. I think it's an area that's often normalized. So it goes back to what I was saying at the start in terms of, knowing what the issues are is one thing, knowing what to do about it is another thing, but actually wanting to do something about it is another thing. And some companies are gathering the data to say workload, which reveals workload is an issue, but it's almost this view of actually it's just to be expected in this job. You can't do anything about it. So I love the example you've just given, which is that actually when it's highlighted as a need and people are willing to do something about it, understanding that we need to do that to help people have good mental health well-being and be productive and stay. And there might be some people who that doesn't fit for, but if it doesn't fit yes, that's the important thing in terms of your values of your company and looking after the people, and you're sticking with those values. It's not going to be perfect for everybody, but it's doing the right thing and being clear about what that is based on your data. That's really interesting.
Essentially, it's the root cause. It's always the root cause. Let's look at what is going on, and then we can build a structure for it. Like, you don't just set off in your car and then decide, you know, okay, well, we'll go this way. You plan your journey out. You learn, okay, what's the roots? What do we do? You don't just go off. I mean, it's easier now with technology, but you always have a plan for these things. You need to do that in terms of your people and culture, because inspiration in a business is really powerful. I've worked for businesses that have been bought over and it loses their core values and 200 members of staff leave. I've seen businesses that put pressure on operational environments. The reason I started my business, we had an office of 8 people. We had 300% turnover in 18 months. They lost £2.75 million a year from the profitable people that were leaving their business because of 3 small things in their operating model that would have changed it. Now, as a business owner or a business leader, that's really dangerous for a bit. That's a serious business, 2.75 million a year, especially in a small office. So, I mean, you can look at it either way, whether it's the right thing to do or it's something that you think you should do or you don't know what to do and I'll chuck stuff at it and see what sticks. The best thing you can do is keep that process of intervention, evaluation from it, because if you don't do anything or follow up on it and you don't inspire your employees to want to feedback, they won't, and therefore you won't learn anything.
But that goes back to actually people wanting to learn, doesn't it? And that's a whole thing about leadership alone, is actually, do we want to know what's really going on here? Do we want to uncover the cracks, or are we happy just keeping them beneath the surface? And I think there are more companies now are seeing, actually knowing that we know the cracks are there, so actually we might as well see them, we can do something about them, rather than just hoping that they'll amend themselves, which inevitably they don't. Carl, what are you going to add?
Well, I like the theme that we're following in each of these case studies. Yeah, so engagement, and then intervention, and then evaluation. So in truth, that means really to understand, to act, and then to monitor what's happening in the outcomes. But in each of those, if you follow those principles, you can't go far wrong in anything in business, I think. But the key thing is, in this particular instance, is we've got the wider sustained engagement is what will sustain the outcomes. Certainly in the short term, when you get movement of key people and you get movement of people, you are going to get a natural deterioration because new things may come in, new things may change. But ultimately, what you want at the beginning is, if you engage with the masses and make the change for the masses within your organization, instead of a change that just affects a few people, then ultimately you will get more of a sustained outcome, because the people will feel that they believe in the approach that you've taken, and they will sustain it, certainly over the short term, then, should there be any changes.
Charlie, have you got anything to add?
I think, yeah, because I think on that point, most people in business understand what build, measure, learn means. It's the exact same. You can put any names on these processes, but it's continuous learning, in the same way that you don't do a gym workout and suddenly you've cracked it, you're healthy for the rest of your life. You need to keep reiterating, keep trying, keep doing new things. It's the same thing for business culture and employee engagement. I think quite often we see interventions done just off of a blind hope of helping. So people feel supported because we've done X, Y, and Z. But actually, if it's not based on what the people within that organization feel, because we speak to construction businesses, we speak to engineering businesses, we speak to office-based marketing agencies. So I think you look at that, everyone has a different perspective. They have different people within there, and therefore that voice being used to tailor it is, everything nowadays is bespoke. You're looking at AI, it bespokes for everything for you. Your Netflix is produced to you in a way that's supposed to be for you. And I think if we're not doing that in terms of our organization, our cultures, then we're going to miss the trick a little bit. Because you can't necessarily follow what another organization does. You need to use this framework, or a framework that you find works around prevention, evaluation, impact. And I think a lot of people get lost.
We've got some questions. So I'm going to pop over to this one here. It says, right, hang on, it just moved. Sorry, it's just moved on my chat box. So case studies are interesting. They focus a lot on organizational leadership. I'd be interested to know what employers are doing about the problems that people bring to work with them, which also impact on productivity.
So that was kind of prevalent in the third case study. I didn't touch upon it too much, but essentially as part of these projects, we provided root cause mental health preventative support. So everything on relationships, finance, nutritional health, physical health, mental health, not just resources, but actionable insights from validated therapists, psychologists based on the situations that they were going through. And we actually found the head of people mentioned in their exit interviews that some of the members of staff were saying it was helping with their anxiety and depression just to be able to vent how they're feeling and get signposted resources or things that they could do from valid sources, but quickly and while they were at home. So it's not necessarily about the organization, but it is looking at essentially that the same process for individuals and the whole organization. It's that root cause, right? What do we do about it? Did it work? Or simply, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? What can I do about it? So this is focused on that organizational perspective because of the people we're talking about here in this room of people talking about business, but there was mental health initiatives all alongside this at the same time for all those individuals.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what Carl and I was saying earlier about supporting managers to feel more confident having the conversations around whatever it is that someone brings to work. And I know some managers are quite anxious about, if I ask someone how they're doing, I've got to come know what the answer is going to be. I've got to be able to solve their problem. I've got to, I don't know what I'm going to be opening up in terms of what someone might say to me. And actually, when we can reassure people that you don't have to solve anything, you just need to show that you can, and you can signpost people on if they want that. But showing you care is what matters. And again, managers, they don't have time to do that because I'm too busy over here doing this other stuff. But if you don't deal with how someone's showing up and whatever they're bringing to that work environment, they're not going to be working very well. So it's something that needs to be addressed. Time needs to be created, and that's one of the big parts, I think, of a manager's role in terms of creating the time to have those kind of proper check-ins. Carl, you've got a thoughtful face on.
Well, I think, listening to the question, what can employers do where people are bringing challenges into the workplace that affect productivity, right? It's certainly the way I have advocated it in the organizations that I've led has been to empower the managers to be able to take the necessary steps to be able to deal with in a supportive way to start off. Now then, if the mindset of the manager is always, I'm allowed and I have permission to be able to make reasonable adjustments to be able to accommodate this individual that's struggling, because it may be a short-term issue that they're dealing with personally that they brought into the workplace, then absolutely they should feel empowered. And great organizational leaders actually inspire the managers to be able to take those actions without fear of reprisal that are right for the team. If it's something more complex and a longer term issue, then the same measures apply, but you may need to get advice and guidance from HR or occupational health, who should be there to be able to support the individual. So I think, there is certain tiers and levels depending on what you're dealing with, but the manager should always feel empowered to either act or to be able to seek advice and guidance and support, never to ignore the issue that's in front of them. And great organizations make sure that happens. That's the key thing.
And someone said earlier in the chat, actually, that they send around resources and so on to managers or to people in their organization. There are lots of resources. I've produced resources for people to use in teams to avoid the topic coming from the managers if the manager has to know what they're doing, what they're talking about. But here's a resource that's going to help us think about this particular topic. It might be stress, it might be anxiety. And it's almost like I'm putting it on the table. Let's all join together in having a conversation about that and what we can do about that and what are our stressors or what causes us anxiety. And we're all on a level playing field, in the same space. Everyone's allowed to be vulnerable. There's that sense of, I don't know the answers, tell me what your experience is, and everyone can join in on that same level, including the manager. I think that really helps build that psychological safety as well that you also talked about, Carl.
I agree. And you know, listen, 20 years ago in the workplace, I heard regular occasions, you know, leave your home at home and bring, I mean, and your work in work. The reality is that is no longer prevalent, and it's not conducive to an inclusive workspace, right? So we all go through moments in our lives where we have challenges at home, no matter what it is, during the year or, I mean, on a regular basis or irregular. The reality is that way you cannot leave it at home. And look at what's, you know, coronavirus made working from home socially acceptable. Ultimately, we've got people on the phone doing customer service activities that are in the home, and they can't leave the work. There's no physical separation barrier anymore. So we've got to have appropriate levels of organizational thinking that allows individuals to be able to blend the work and the home, because there's so many different factors. And the other thing is, if you're a manager and you're having to deal with this, to somebody who brings an issue with you, there is a myriad of legislative requirements that maybe you're not aware of. Nobody can expect to be aware of everything. So if you don't know the answer, the organization should have the pathways for you to be able to go and seek it. And it's okay to say, right, let me come back to you on that. If it's an internal demands, pressure, budgets, the manager might be comfortable to deal with it. But if it's a lifestyle issue that needs being brought into the workplace and needing adjustments, then, you know, are they reasonable? Are they not? Right, how do I get help and support? The advice and guidance is very easy to come by nowadays, and most organizations are geared up for this.
That is a fantastic summary, Carl. That's a good place to pause. Thank you for that. We are rapidly running out of time, and we've got a couple more questions which we will pick up afterwards, because time doesn't allow us to go into those now. If you've got any more questions, then obviously do email us and we can respond to you after this webinar. Before I hand back to David, we've got one more poll question that we'd like you to do, please. If Kirsty, you can bring that up, that'd be great. And again, don't forget, this is completely anonymous. It's useful feedback for us. And then if you're happy just to bring up the results, please, Kirsty. And then I'm going to hand over to David. Yeah, really helpful, really interesting. And just to let you know that Kirsty's also just put in the chat box a link to past webinars, which are about a whole range of different topics. So check that out as well. Thank you so much, Charlie. Thank you, Carl. Over to you, David. Got 1 minute.
Yeah, 1 minute. We're on time. How did we do that? I've no idea. Yeah, I find great delight in thanking our panelists, Lisa, Charlie, and Carl, and thank you, Kirsty and Andrew, for working behind the scenes. It's been such an insightful discussion. I wish it was longer. I wish we could make it 2 hours, but I'm sure that our audience are grateful that we're finishing on time. Thank you to our audience for joining us. Without you, this would not be possible. We'll distribute the slides after the webinar, and please let us know any feedback that you have, including any topics that you would like us to cover in future webinars. Thank you once again, and I hope you all have a lovely afternoon. Goodbye.